The promise of New Hampshire and the promise of the United States more generally has always been optimism about our future. That future generations will lead a life better than ours, just as we've led a better life than our parents. And there will be equal opportunity for all. Yet increasingly, that promise is being compromised. Over the last 2 generations, the real per capita income of the bottom 20% of the population has actually fallen. And of the second quintile of the population has risen barely, in real terms, 0.1% a year. And as regards equality of opportunity, it is interesting to note that today in the United States, if you're born into the bottom quintile of the income distribution of the population, you have only a 50-50 chance of escaping it. In Denmark, you have a 3 out of 4 chance of escaping it. We need to do something differently to preserve that optimism. But differently not by just doing something, but by doing something effectively. That may seem like a big task for the not-for-profit community, but it's interesting to note that in a recent study of the 9 largest Western economies, the not-for-profit community was larger than the construction industry. It was larger than the business, finance, and banking industry. It is a powerhouse dedicated to not the political term, but the real social capital and common wealth of the society. So tonight we're going to talk about what we're doing about that and provide you with some vignettes during the rest of the program of how we're accomplishing that so that we can preserve the promise of New Hampshire for the children. So now let me introduce our next speaker to that end. Dr. Michael McAfee is director of the Promise Neighborhoods Institute at PolicyLink. Michael is working with leaders across the country to improve education and development outcomes of all children in our nation's most distressed communities, including right here in Manchester. Prior to PolicyLink, Michael held senior positions in the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development and the Greater Kansas City Community Foundation. Michael served in the U.S. Army, received his Doctor of Education in Human and Organizational Learning from George Washington University. Please welcome Dr. Michael McAfee.
Good evening. I wanted to pause for a moment and just remind everyone when Christopher was singing, how you felt. Because when I was listening to him, I could feel his spirit. And I couldn't stop smiling. And the reason is because when I think about the opportunity that we have to really create a society in which all can participate and prosper, we've got to hold on to that feeling. And the reason is because this work is really hard. And the work that is in front of you is really hard, but is very doable when you think about the population of the state and when you think about the population of Manchester itself. And so what I just want to share with you a little bit this evening are things that I'm seeing nationally and why I even chose to come back here, because I think there's some phenomenal work going on here. As the director of the Promise Neighborhoods Institute at PolicyLink, I have the privilege of being able to work with the Obama administration and leaders in 61 communities across the country to do what we've always wanted to do, which was to create communities of opportunity in some of our most distressed communities. Communities of opportunities where we're not just investing in a child at one particular developmental stage of their lives, but at every developmental stage. That when a child is born, we can assure them the promise that if they do their part, we're going to see them through from cradle to career. That's our job. That's our job no matter where you stand on the political spectrum. But so often in our work, we've siloed our work off. We celebrate patting ourselves on the back for doing really well at early learning. We pat ourselves on the back for doing really good at some mentoring programs and after-school programs. And then we get lulled into a sense of complacency. Because all the while, we've not done the one thing that is so critical if we're going to change the outcomes for all of our children in this state. And that is, first of all, hold the population level result. Not hold the result for a few hundred children, but hold the population level result in our work. If there are 30,000, 100,000 children that need something from us, that's what we should be working towards. And so often we get lulled into thinking that things are okay because we see progress with a small subpopulation. And while that is good, it is not enough. And what we're learning about the work right now is if you even go to the What Works database, we know how to do this work. We know what we need to do. But so often we've decided that instead of doing the work that we need to do in this room, we do it in the parking lots. Or we choose to sit quiet knowing that if our voice was in the room, a different decision would have been made. And so when I listened to Christopher, it reminded me something very important about how I take up my own leadership role. Before I can be of help to anybody else, I've got to decide what my voice is going to stand for. I've got to decide what my voice is going to stand for. I can play small, I can find 1,001 ways to do work avoidance, or I can do the work. And I'll give you a perfect example to make this very real. Often when you serve as the director of a national intermediary, you can be loved just flying around the country, writing papers, visiting with folks, throwing out a couple of provocative ideas, and then leaving real quick. And people love that. But that's not the work. Promise Neighborhoods has 10 results and 15 indicators nationally. 10 results and 15 indicators from cradle to career. And our job is to help sites do that work. If I took up my role and my voice differently, what I would do is just write papers about the work, tell stories about what local leaders are doing on the ground. But what we decided to do was that we were actually going to own the same 10 results and 15 indicators as our colleagues in these communities. That put a lot of stress on us as an intermediary because we sit at a place where we don't control anything. And so my leadership is only earned by the value that I provide. That's exactly where you want to be when you're leading, but it's also a place that is very scary because accountability is not clear. But that's what you're being asked to do when you think about holding population level results, or even if you think about taking on things like collective impact efforts. You're being asked to hold population level results and figure out how to align your contribution with everyone else's so that you can aggregate it up in a way that makes a difference. And it is scary. And the reason why I tell you that story is because I had to decide how I wanted to lead first. I had to decide the type of institution that I wanted to create. And I also had to decide something very important. I had to decide that it was okay to allow people to sit with conflict in order to do the work on behalf of the people that we're privileged to serve. And early on, that meant that we were even out of alignment with the US Department of Education, the very funder that created the program. And I'll give you a practical example of sometimes how if you can just lead a little differently, you can have big results. So Promise Neighborhoods has been 40 years in the making. We've asked to have flexible dollars. We've asked to have large amounts of money. We've asked to have those large amounts of money over a substantial period of time to show progress. We have that in Promise Neighborhoods. 5 years, up to $30 million, and local leaders craft strategy. That's just what we've asked for. And we're getting ready to start this national initiative with no points of view about data systems, no points of view about a disciplined way of executing on the work. We were just going to go do good work. Now, at the same time we're starting, I'm quite aware of the political environment that we were in. And a senator actually decided that they were going to ask the Government Accountability Office to go and assess the efficacy of Promise Neighborhoods. Now, all of us who have run something know that it's really idiotic to try to evaluate a program 2 years in when you actually haven't even gotten going. But the intention was actually not to really discover its efficacy. It was really to use it as a political tool to damage the program, because the one was banking on the fact that we as leaders were going to take our roles up like we always do. Lack of discipline, good heart, but not really going to hold to doing things different on the ground. We fought it out and got to a place where we actually got 61 communities to agree to actually use data for learning, continuous improvement, and shared accountability. We actually bought a national infrastructure for them to use as a data system to do this work. And then we had enough sense to go and get back in alignment with the department. Sometimes you've got to fight with folks that you love, and that's just life. But I can tell you today, we're serving, after 3 years, more than 250,000 children in our network. The GAOS just issued their report. If you go on Google and you type in GAO and Promised Neighborhoods, the report says, Promised Neighborhoods promotes collaboration, but needs to do a national evaluation. Well, that is really a no, you know what statement. That's exactly where we wanted to be. It was so good in terms of what they saw that the senator who issued the report chose not to even do a press release about it. Folks, this is not a small thing. If we had to behave differently, we would have just took the chance that had been 40 years in the making and destroyed this opportunity for millions of children. That's what was at stake. Lack of focus, lack of results, lack of discipline, and afraid to take on producing conflict in service of the people we're privileged to serve. I share that simple example with you because I did have to choose. I did have to choose to be out of alignment. I did have to risk that my boss, Angela Glover Blackwell and Jeff Canada, would be upset. I did have to risk the department being upset. And I did have to risk folks believing enough to give this new way of doing the work a try. And that's before we get to my team. Those were just decisions that I had to make. And the reason why I'm sharing that with you, folks, is because before you can talk about what everybody else has to do, you have to decide how you want to take up your leadership. And that's what I'm excited about when I come to this state, is that there are leaders in this room who are taking up their leadership in ways that are going to lead the nation in terms of how we improve outcomes for children, all children. There are leaders in here. You've got the superintendent, the mayor, the police chief, the director of the health department, all on a leadership team in Manchester talking about producing outcomes for children. And the reason why that is exciting, because some of the things that we need to do can't be done with a program. Some of them have to be done by improving the institutional quality of our institutions. That's tough work. It's not fun work. It's not sexy work, but it is the work. And what I'm asking you to think about is, take up your leadership role to produce population-level results. I never thought that I would be in a place like this. Never. But the only reason I'm here is because of folks like you. That's the only reason. You wouldn't have wanted me in your programs when I was a child. I would have messed your numbers up. You would not have. I didn't even get serious about school after I got to my junior year in high school. I was so rebellious. Even when I got into grad school, I was working at the Community Foundation. I had to go tell them, look, put me on provisional admit. Just put me in provisionally and let me show you what I can do, because I was not really serious yet. But it was only because of what I saw at the Community Foundation with leaders, how to lead civically, that I actually got serious. But I knew how to hustle enough to still get out of the line and go to the dean of the School of Public Administration and say, just take me in on a gamble. Just take me in on a gamble. And they did. Imagine if they had said no. I may not have never even got to my doctorate. Folks, our opportunity doesn't have to be that random. It doesn't have to be that random for folks. It's evidence when I go home. My sisters don't have the same opportunity I had. And I can see how that goes on and builds a legacy that is very tough to reverse. I've got a nephew right now. Some of you heard me talk to you about it. He's been kicked out of school 6 more times since I talked to you and just got off a house arrest. And what is so sad, that when we think about the state that he's in, when we think about how are the children doing, a child that is defiant is perceived as being criminal now. A child that is defiant, I don't know too many boys that aren't, but especially depending on the color of your skin and your socioeconomic status, you go to jail. They kick you out of school, they call truant officers, and you go to jail. That's not how you raise a successful society. Because the reality is this, you can keep criminalizing him all day long. He's going to be in that community one day. You can deal with him now, you can deal with him later. And to kick a child out of school and provide them no counseling supports, to me, is criminal. And that doesn't have to happen. And I'm sharing these stories to say that you have the power to create a system of supports throughout this state that will transform the nation. You've got a population level that is manageable. I believe you were telling me about this opportunity to create a promised state. I think that's powerful, a promised state. Not just a promised neighborhood, because the reality is we're a highly mobile society. You have the opportunity to create a promised state. Show this nation what it means to create cradle-to-career opportunities. That's what's at stake here. And lastly, I'll share one example of how you can take up your roles differently if you imagine them differently. One of our promised sites, one of our indicators is that children will have a medical home, meaning that they have access to a primary care physician and that they're not going to the emergency room. Well, so often when we start with an indicator, we run to thinking of programs and activities and things that we can do, and we never really ask, really, what does it take? We call that the story behind the curve. Why is an indicator trending in a particular direction? Well, they got off to running, going to do outreach and things like that, only to discover that that didn't work. They hadn't done their homework. When they went back and did their homework, what they discovered was that parents were being kicked off the rolls every 3 months automatically by the computer. So imagine a poor family that has challenges with transportation, challenges with getting off work like all of us. Many places, if you don't remember what it's like, you ask to get off, and that's highly problematic. But some of us have forgotten that. They realized that it was actually a rule. It wasn't a statute. It wasn't mandatory that families would be kicked off 3 months. Somehow this had just started occurring. And the people who were processing the families just never saw it as their role to say, well, this is really crazy. And in fact, that's not even a product that I would buy because it wouldn't work for my family. Making that one tweak changed the lives of thousands of children and families in that state. And I share that example with you because there's going to be all sorts of things like that lying around on the floor that we can pick up and actually do something with. Didn't cost a lot of money. It required someone to reimagine their role. It required someone to first reimagine their role, and then second, to have the courage actually to go and take some action and not just complain about the problem. And I invite you all to consider doing that. You know, I used to think that the respite for this work was actually just having some downtime. But I've come to believe that the respite is actually in doing the work. Because our souls actually do yearn to improve the human condition. And we're actually not going to find peace. We're actually not going to find peace with ourselves until we're improving the human condition for every single citizen in this country. And our job has to be to create the opportunity, challenge people to step into that opportunity, and to build a society in which all of us can participate and prosper. Thank you.